Okay, folks, this is an update on my 300 conversion from a single barrel to a four barrel, and you can changing it over from a TFI ignition system to the DuraSpark ignition system. What you're looking at right here is the components on a 85 with the TFI ignition. And when I talked about changing these wires and changing this over, I said this is all plug and play. And this is the reason I'm going to show you how this plug and play works. I know for sure that it works up till at least 85. This truck you're looking at right here is an 85. I am not absolutely 100% sure on an 86 with a 6-cylinder it's the same. It should be. If it's not, you may have to get into some wiring. If you do, it's only going to be in this right here, in this connection here. What you have here is you got 3 connectors. You go this one in particular, and the reason I point this out, I'll show you later, is this right here has got a big wire in it. And then you got the smaller ones, so 3 smaller ones. This connector goes to the harness, which goes to the engine. And these connectors are for the on this connector is the wires for the oil pressure sender and the temperature sender. The oil pressure sender is back up underneath there, and the temperature sender is up here on this, if I'm not mistaken. I'll look on the other one. Anyway, this connection is when you get the early model harness from 80 to 81 or 2, you'll get this connection, and then it'll have a couple more of these, and they will plug differently because there will be a plug on the distributor, and you'll see that here in a minute because I'll show you the other one. But these 3 connections are the ones that you have to worry about. So you'll start this process by unplugging this connection, and this connection on this unit, and then you will pull that thick film ignition system out. Alright, and with that, then you can remove all of that's underneath that little cap, all of those wires that go up underneath this air cleaner, and all of this stuff that's underneath here for this feedback carburetor, and all of these hoses, all this vacuum stuff can go away. Alright, there's a connector. Let's see if I can get it back where you can see it a little bit better. But right in there, where you can see that great big wire going in there with that rubber grommet around it, that right there, you can take that completely out. Okay, I did on the other one. You don't have any wires in here. There's underneath the dash is the PCM, and you can unscrew it from the bracket on the dash, and you will no longer have any of the emissions or that computer control left in the vehicle. So you don't have a bunch of extra wires hanging around. This little module right here goes away. This connection, this big gob of wires here, will go away. This you no longer need because it plugs into the reader. As you can tell, I've been in the mud with this truck. It's been a mud bogger, so it does not have so it's well covered. Well covered. Okay, now I'm going to show you what the other one looks like now that you've had a chance to see this. Okay, now what you're looking at is the conversion. This is the 4-barrel setup with the DuraSpark ignition system with the non-feedback. This actually has a Autolite carburetor on it, a 4-barrel, and it has a Offenhauser 4-barrel intake on it. Anyway, so what we got here is the same 3 wires. See this harness right here coming out of the truck here. See that right there? You got 3 plugs on that. 1, 2, and the third one is right here. This plug right here. Oh, let's see here. This one. Get the camera pointed in that direction. This one. This one. And this one come out of the harness that goes back to the fuse box right here. That's this harness. Okay. Those 3 plugs. This is the harness going down to the engine. And I was wrong earlier. That connector up there is for the emissions. The temperature sensor for the engine is back on the back of the motor. And get that thing zoomed in back there. You can kind of see the wire for it right there. It hooks onto the block. It goes back around on the back side of the head. And the oil temperature sensor is right there. Alright, that comes into that harness. There's your distributor connection into the harness, and then the harness comes back around, comes up to this. Whenever I get my camera focused in the right direction here. Okay, this comes back up to these 3 connectors. Alright, 2 of these connectors that were on the truck, or one of the connectors that was in the main harness, will plug to your new control module. Alright, the holes are already in the fender. All you gotta do is put them in, put the bolts in. This is one of them. Alright, this connects and goes into that box. The big connection with the 3 smaller wires and the 1 big wire. See, that goes into the connection that goes in the engine harness. The second one of those comes out of the box. The big one with the 4 wires on it, 5 wires. It comes out of the box and also plugs into the new harness that you got with off the 80 model, the early 80. And then this connection here, which is just a single wire, also connects into the harness that went back to the controls. That's all you got. Now you may have this extra wire here, and it may have gone to a tack or possibly a choke heater. I'm not for sure on this one. I didn't use it. I didn't need it, so it's just tucked back up here out of the way. The one thing that you're going to have to do when you change this over to a DuraSpark is, you see that hose right there? On the end of that, this hose right here that I'm touching is a vacuum hose. You will have to have vacuum in order for that distributor to work properly. That line comes up off the top of that and connects to, on this 4-barrel, right here. And in a little bit I'll show you where to connect that hose on on the regular carburetor, on the single barrel carburetors that this car uses or truck uses normally. You need to make sure that that gets done, that you have this hose, because if you don't, you will not have vacuum advance for your distributor, which is required to make it function properly when you mash on the throttle or let off of it. Alright, next up is I will show you the difference in the carburetors between the early model carburetors and the feedback carburetors that these trucks used in the late 80s. Alright, what you're looking at here is the two different the two different carburetors that were used on those engines. This one here was used from the late 60s up until the mid 80s, when they changed it over and went to the thick film ignition system, the TFI, and the feedback. This is what's referred to as, what I'm referring to as a feedback carburetor. It's got all this stuff on the side of it, and these solenoids and these hoses. All this stuff can go away. Now, if you use this feedback carburetor, this one will still work, okay, on your engine with the DuraSpark ignition system. However, you will need to make sure that you plug off all of these connections. This one here has to go. This will stay. This will stay. This is for your choke assembly, and if you take this off, your choke assembly will have problems. But this one can go away. Cap this line. Make sure you keep this line connected. But you still have to deal with these. Like, this is your throttle positioning sensor for the PCM. It doesn't have to have its wires. Just leave it unplugged. This also will. What it was supposed to do was keep the idle up for when there was a demand, like I don't right off the top of my head, I can't think what the demand is for it, but anyway, it also helps tell the throttle position, or how much. It worked as like a D-cell valve. The old D-cell valves is what it basically boils down to, except it was controlled by the PCM instead of the vacuum. Okay, so again, it's not necessary. You can unplug it and it won't affect anything. This is another vacuum line that needs to be plugged. All right, this vacuum line down here also needs to be plugged. Anything that's got a vacuum port, there's a better view of it. Anything that's got a vacuum port on the outside of the carburetor needs to be plugged. This also needs to go away, or be plugged off. Ideally, this right here is your fuel inlet. This big round thing is your fuel filter. You'll definitely want to keep those intact. Okay, if you use this carburetor, the only thing that you need, this is your heat riser for your choke. If you're old enough to have that, you can convert this to a manual choke if you want, and I would suggest that. Just get you a kit that bolts on here, and then just it ties into this lever and makes you a manual choke. But in order to use this carburetor on that setup, you only have one vacuum line. This port right here is where your this, I don't know if it's got one or two. It's got two. There's one up here. This port here, you'll cap off. Okay. This port here is where you're going to want to get your distributor vacuum from. Don't get it from here. Get it from down here. All right. This is the port that you need to run to your distributor. Okay. And then your distributor will function like it's supposed to. But everything else, this again is your fuel inlet. I mean, they look very similar, but there's a huge difference in internally they're not, but externally with all the extra junk that's unnecessary, they make for a problem. But one of the things that you have to watch for with these carburetors, and it doesn't make any difference if it's this one or this one, one of the biggest run problems that these 300s have with this carburetor is these screws right here. Alright, and it doesn't matter which one it is, doesn't matter if it's this one or this one, they will all, and these ones are the same way, all the ones that I've ever had, if they've run long enough, these stupid screws will come loose on you. Alright, and the whole top half of the carburetor will rotate separate from the bottom half down here, and will cause some bad run issues because it's sucking air between this half of the housing and this half of the housing through this gasket right here. Make sure that if you have trouble with it running, that all these screws are tight, and even check these ones down here. Every time I've ever replaced one of these carburetors on one of these 300s, I've always taken these screws out one at a time and put a little blue Loctite on them and put them back in. I recommend that. And I know a lot of people say, well, you don't want to use Loctite on carburetor screws. Well, blue Loctite, you don't have to get crazy with it. It just takes a drop. But a little bit of Loctite, especially on this particular style of carburetor, could save you a lot of hassles later down the road. But my suggestion is to take this off and find you one of these and put on it. You don't have near the vacuum hoses, you don't have near the headaches, and you can make it run just as well with this carburetor as it does with that one, and solve a bunch of problems. And it does away with all that vacuum hoses and the smog pump and all the other stuff that's unnecessary for off-road applications. I think that pretty well wraps up what I need to explain on the deal. I hope this helps you guys that are doing the conversions.